I think a question that many, many people have on their minds, many Americans who are trying to understand Islam and trying to understand the Quran, would ask this question. When we see the headlines of the brutality and the atrocities being committed by ISIS in the Middle East, unspeakable horrors, is that a natural outflow of pursuing the teachings of the Quran, or is it a perversion of the Quran?
And I'll just throw in the question I was going to ask, and that is, you hear it all the time, Islam is a religion of peace. And it gets to the same issue. What do you say to that question?
Yeah, this is a fascinating question. I mean, when you get to the heart of it, how do we define a religion? How do we define a belief system? There's a lot of questions that come up here. When people say Islam is a religion of peace, I think the best that they can mean is that there are Muslims who honestly follow Islam, who honestly believe it is a peaceful religion. And I'll agree with that. That is the case. That's what I was taught. My parents had taught me to live a peaceful form of Islam. They said that the jihad had been abrogated, had been canceled by peace. But when you take a look at what Islam is historically, if you define Islam as that religious system which the Muhammad in the pages of history left behind, there's no question that it's violence. So, to be a little bit more clear, when you take a look at the Quran, you will see certain passages like Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 256, which says, La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. And Muslims will quote this and they will say, look, it says there's no compulsion in religion. Obviously, it's peaceful. And Surah Al-Kafirun, towards the end of the Quran, says, look, you have your religion, for me, my religion. Again, a relatively peaceful message. But the Quran also has verses, like in chapter 9, verse 5, slay the infidel wherever you find them. Lay siege to them and take them captive. Chapter 9, verse 29 says, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay the tax and feel humiliated. Chapter 9, verse 111 says, Allah has bought your life and your property for this, that you may slay in battle and be slain. So you got the peaceful as well as the violent. Now historically, you can look into the pages of early Islam and see what Muhammad taught was an originally peaceful message. Chapter 2 of the Quran came early. Surah Al-Kafirun came early, and then it culminated, the last chapter of the Quran, the last major chapter of the Quran, which was revealed, is Surah 9, this violent chapter. And so Islam, according to Islamic tradition, culminated into this message of ultimately violence. Go out and subjugate people. Many Muslims today don't know that. They honestly haven't learned that. All they've been taught in the mosques is that Islam is a religion of peace. All they've been taught is these peaceful verses. You know, Islam isn't like Protestant Christianity. Protestant Christianity teaches sola scriptura. Go to the Bible, exegete it for yourself. Muslims don't do that. They learn the Quran through their imams at the mosque, through their leaders. And so they're only taught these peaceful passages, and so they honestly believe it. So the point I want to get across to you is if you cross paths with someone who says Islam is a religion of peace, they are not lying to you. They honestly believe probably that it is a religion of peace. But you should know that their opinion is contrary to the swaths of centuries of Islamic jurisprudence, which does not teach the same thing. And in fact, the evidence that is there is that Islam can't really be called a religion of peace in virtually any sense.
Wow. All right, Lee, maybe you have a question from Twitter. And let me just say, for those of you in-house, if you have some questions for Nabeel, if you can just come down this aisle over here. And we'll start with Twitter questions and we'll go back and forth. And so, go ahead.
Let me just, a quick follow-up to that.
Sure.
So where does that leave us? What should our response be in light of that explanation?
So first thing is, if you want to read more about understanding jihad, there is a book called Understanding Jihad by David Cook. He's a professor at Rice University. Amazing book. Read that. The second thing I would want to say is Jesus looked into the eyes of those who were willing to kill him, and he loved them anyway. I mean, think of the centurion who claims at the end of Mark, surely this is the Son of God. Take a look at those who were next to him on the cross mocking him. He was even willing to forgive one of them that very day. Jesus was not hateful of people who were caught in the system of sin. Jesus loved, and he was willing to die for us while we were yet his enemies. And in the same way, if we're going to follow Jesus, we shouldn't be afraid There is no fear. Fear doesn't make sense as a Christian response. Anxiety, Philippians chapter 4 says, do not be anxious about anything. So there is no room for fear, there's no room for anxiety, but there's room for power and love. Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that does not exclude Muslim neighbors. So know the truth and love all Muslims and be willing to even die if you really consider yourself a follower of Jesus.